Morning, everybody. Welcome back to our second show of 2026 on the Ad Podcast. We've got an exciting guest for you guys today. Scott Allison is the co-founder and global chairman and the former CEO of Allison+Partners, now known as Allison Worldwide, a major global integrated communications and marketing firm that he helped launch in 2001 with a vision for a people-centric entrepreneurial agency that could compete on the world stage. Under his leadership, the firm grew from a startup to a global enterprise with dozens of offices across multiple continents, advising major brands and leaders on communication strategy, comms, crisis management, media training, and integrated storytelling. He's recognized with the industry for leadership and innovation and has been a finalist for awards such as EY's Entrepreneur of the Year and Communications Executive of the Year. In addition to his communications career, Scott also co-founded Slam Films, a US-based production company, and helped establish a related UK production entity, the Bridge Film Company Ltd, Ventures, which is aimed at creating and producing film projects, including documentary work such as The Bridge, one of his most recent films. So, Scott, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate you making the time.
Dylan, great. Happy New Year to you. Glad I could be part of the second show of the year.
Yeah, let's go. Well, not a lot of people were brave enough to book a show the week of New Year's, but I appreciate you making the time. So, you've had a long storied career. We talked a little bit about it off camera, but, I always love to start off with a little bit of an origin story. You and I just talked about how chaotic things are with the dot-com crisis and all of that. And would love to kind of, give young people who do want to get into the industry maybe a sense of how you were able to do it. So do you want to bring us back to the beginning? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you study? And how'd you get in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely, Dylan. No, I am a fifth generation Californian. I grew up in the Bay Area, but then I left to go to San Diego State. I thought I was going to be a journalist, and they had a good journalism program down there. So I headed to San Diego and got my degree from San Diego State in journalism with a minor in public relations. And 3 days after graduation, I was sent to Dallas, Texas, and I got a job with a political consulting firm called Direct Communications. And ostensibly, we worked on the Texas governor's race in '86 and the Louisiana Senate campaign. So it was a baptism by fire, a kid from California. All of a sudden, I'm emboldened in Southern politics and experience. And I always tell it's for the young. Like, do a stint in politics when you're young. I also learned the hard lesson that when the election ends, basically everybody loses their job. So, it's November and I'm unemployed, and I said, what am I going to do? And I decided to go back to San Diego. And I caught on with a kind of a small regional public relations firm called the Gable Group. And great firm because it gave me great exposure. They were real generalist firms. I was doing a little bit of tech, a little bit of sports, a little bit of entertainment, professional services, got a lot of exposure and a lot of opportunity. I spent 12 years at the firm. And by the time I left, I was a partner in the firm, owned a stake in the firm. However, having grown up in the Bay Area and you go to 1999, San Francisco seemed like the center of the universe. Everything was Bay Area related. And so a recruiter got in touch and I took a job at Connors Communications and was the general manager of their San Francisco office. And Connors was a high flying, internet PR firm. And so for 2 years, it was just massive scale and growth. Had a chance to launch things like Nordstrom.com, Disney, Priceline. I mean, it was right in on the ground floor what was happening online. And there, a guy who brought me on was their chief operating officer, Andy Hardy Brown. And so great run for about 18 months. And what's going to happen here. It's a internet based. And man, you get to the summer of 2001 and this thing is collapsing.
Wow.
And so Andy came out to San Francisco and we're sitting at a cafe and we said, all right, what are we going to do here? I had been named president of the company in early April, which is kind of like being told, hey, good news is you're captain of the ship. Bad news, we hit an iceberg about 100 back. So Andy and I did everything we could to kind of turn things around. And we're sitting at this cafe in San Francisco and having drinks. And I think the more drinks that we had, kind of hit on this crazy idea. Well, what if we approached the owner of Connors and said, sell us San Francisco and Los Angeles? And at the time it was London, New York, San Francisco, and LA. And she agreed. And we bought the company for $1.
Wow.
Now later, we kind of thought we might have overpaid because
it came with a lot
what
of
happened was we
exposure.
agreed to take on San Francisco and Los Angeles, but we had to take on all the liabilities too.
Okay.
Because even moving employees' vacation balances, which you have to carry the liability on your balance sheet. And so we launched this new company on September 4th, 2001. And we always said, like, we had this great first week in business, because the real challenge then, could we get all the clients and all the employees to sign on with this new unnamed entity? And we thought, God, if we got 80%, we're doing good. We got 100%.
Wow.
For 1 week. And then 9/11 hit, and everybody's got their memory. And I remember I was in the car driving to the train station, BART, to take the train into the city. And I got the radio on, and I was like, you didn't know what was going on, just like chaos. So I called my wife and I said, something's happening. What's turn on the TV? Looks like some planes, hit in New York, and not really engaged. And I get on the train, I get to the office in San Francisco of our 1 week startup. And then you're sitting in the conference room going, I'm talking to Andy, and like, we did not have this in the strategy calamity. So business tanked. I mean, for the first I always say we were probably bankrupt, but too stupid to know it. We spent 2 years banging our head and really just trying to keep this thing afloat. And then it just took off. And so when I stepped back in May, it was 100 million in revenue and 52 offices and 1,000 people around the world. So it was quite a journey, I will say.
Yeah, that's a pretty wild story. I had a few things that I wanted to touch on. So, San Diego State is kind of known for some PR shop guys. Michael Allgun from Havas Formula came out of San Diego State. Did you guys
and
ever?
So Michael and I are old friends, Donna. And the funny story is, we were account coordinators at the Gable Group together.
No way, that's wild.
Two guys from San Diego State, and Michael was a goofball and I was a goofball. I mean, we were 23 years old in San Diego, sharing an office. I would accuse him of goofing off all day. He would accuse me of goofing off all day. In fact, no one would have ever predicted that these two yahoos were going to build two of the most successful agencies in North America. That was predicted at that time.
Yeah, that's wild. I just know him because he was in my fraternity. He was a Sigma Chi while at State, I think, right?
He was right next door to us.
That's funny.
I don't think that there was not a lot of shots back and forth.
I can imagine. So I wanted to touch base on your politics work, because I launched the Washington, D.C. office of an agency in my 20s. And one of the things that was really eye-opening for me when I went down and launched that office is that basically, like, all the rules that the ad industry and the communications industry has to participate, regulation around who you can target and what kind of data you can use and opt in and all that stuff. The thing that I learned about politics is that all that stuff goes out the window. Like, basically, if you can do something with technology, you can basically do it, and it's not very regulated.
Think about what it was like in the mid 80s.
Oh my goodness.
Really not regulated. Yeah. And it was funny because it was a great learning experience. And so what I was setting up was a phone bank. And so we built, a phone bank, and it was old school, obviously not the tech of today. These were dial-up phones. Yep. And we were doing outbound, phone calls, and I had 300 people. So again, 23-year-old kid from San Diego. And now I'm in charge of hiring 300 people, managing 300, managing phone banks, reporting results. It was it was 14 hours a day,
Oof.
building all the way up to the election. But it taught me a lot about people, talked about having a chance to really have responsibility. So at a very young age, I had a chance to see an operation and learn you have to kind of create a culture, create a vibe, get people motivated. So it was actually pretty heady stuff to be that young and have that responsibility.
Yeah, that's wild. So I wanted to ask you, as somebody who had a driver's seat window to the dot-com crash, you actually went through it. There's not as many execs these days who can say that. And I've heard a lot of comparisons that the current AI bubble has a lot of similarities to the dot-com bubble. I wonder if you have any commentary on, whether you think we're heading
I think
for
there's similarities, Dylan, but I don't know if it's a direct. I mean, the similarities, all of a sudden you've got, technology, a phase in technology that's a lot of money's getting pumped into startups. But I think back then money was just being allocated like crazy to agencies and the budgets, if you look at the run from 98 through the end of 2000, I mean, we couldn't spend it as fast as people were throwing money at you. I remember my first couple months at Connors, all I did was answer the phone. And it was the phone with people that were trying to hire us. And it got to the point where I was having to turn down most of it because I didn't have the people, the space. You couldn't hire fast enough. And, and literally people would say, you don't have to have a pitch. Our CEO will come by and drop off a check if you'll take on. I honestly felt like I'd fallen down the hole in Wonderland. It was that strange. And I think you've never seen anything like it again. But as you saw the momentum build, and then it just burst.
Yeah.
I don't think you got that kind of euphoria going right now where you're going to see this big burst. I really don't. I think you can see some gradual deleveraging. And the other thing is the agency business, it had expanded so big as part of that. And when that bubble burst, the agency industry really contracted. We've already seen the contraction in the agency. The last 2 years have been just brutal. I would say the toughest I've seen in the agency business since that dot-com crash have been the last, really 20, 24 and 25. And massive consolidation, massive contraction. I think if you looked at the head count of the people that were in agencies at the end of 22, that's going to be your high watermark. I don't know if you ever get back to that, Dylan, honestly.
Wow.
That may be the all-time high.
So what do you think is driving that? Is it in-housing? Is it, AI making things easier to do, like, self-serve media buying tools, a little bit of everything? Like,
I think you've got a lot of efficiency tools, and that has made it easier. But I think there's a lot of hesitancy right now. And a lot of companies have either cut their budgets or, eliminated budgets. They've brought things in-house. Now, I totally disagree with Martin Sorrell, who came out in an article and said, PR is dead. That's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous statement. And if you think about it, what is PR? PR is public relations. And it's all the relations you have with all your constituents. So unless all of your publics went away, public relations is here to stay. But I think it goes through a constant, evolution. And I think the agencies have really been hit with that, trying to keep up with technology. But I do think a lot of agencies are kind of missing the mark. And, and go back, Dylan, to, after the dot-com, agencies that try to position themselves, we're a social media agency. How dumb does that sound now? We're a digital agency. Everybody's digital. These things become almost like the flavor of the month. And I think the agencies now that are struggling to try to position themselves, we're an AI agency, or trying to create products in AI that you can sell to clients, it's just not going to work. There's too much tech out there, too many products. The bet is if you've got to use AI to create enormous efficiencies with your business, and really go to market with that and use that as a great tool to then unlock your people to do really strategic, creative thinking, really providing high-level consulting. That's where the win's got to be. But 26 is going to be the year. I think this is the year where agencies, holding company models, this is kind of the make or break. This is the put year. You got through the big Omnicom IPG merger. You've had the big shakeout. There's been tons of layoff, tons of consolidation. Now you got to prove that your model works, and this is the year.
Yeah, that's wild. I want to get back to the Holdco stuff, but you mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to spend time on. So, yeah, I think Martin Sorrell's comment on PR being dead is especially short-sighted when you see how important PR is becoming for AEO. The fact that these third-party quoted citations inside of news publications or blogs or whatever you want to call them are a key driver for AI optimization. So it seems like PR is actually back more than ever because of how fast
Yeah,
search is
and
falling.
everybody's focused now that the buzz phrase is storytelling. Well, it's always been storytelling. Yeah, that's not new. And I think companies are realizing they have to get out their story, the story of the brand, the story of the people, the story of the leadership team, the story of the product. So they realize that a lot of the traditional media that we used to look at even 5-10 years has evolved, and certainly AI brought it up too in how it searches and how it brings things up. Having a third party endorsement is really a key part of that. So yeah, it's not going anywhere, but people are going to have to really adapt.
Yeah. And I also wanted to get your commentary on independent journalism. Obviously you agreed to come on my podcast. You could maybe tell me what you thought was interesting about it, but more importantly, the idea that, in the past, maybe it was like, PR week or something like that. And now you've got these independent journalisms like Meredith in the Media that has a Substack, and, executive comms people are breaking stories on her Substack rather than giving the exclusive to PR week. What is your point of view on kind of this rise of independent journalism and B2B influencers, et cetera?
I think it's great, and it creates a lot of opportunities for companies. I think back to when I started my career and you're trying to get the word out about a client, you were pretty limited. You had your daily newspapers, you had your trade publications, and if the San Diego Union Tribune did not want to pick up the story, you were kind of stuck, right? You don't have that situation now. You've got so many other feeders that you can use to get your story out there. And I think that's great. I think it's, in some ways, it's a little bit unregulated. It's kind of the Wild West. You don't always know who's really carrying the story or putting up the video and things like that. But this certainly provides more opportunity to get a story out there.
Yeah. And the other thing you mentioned is, kind of the importance of like executive-led storytelling, or they call it founder-led marketing now. Sometimes these smaller challenger brands can outperform legacy companies because they have like a founder that is galvanizing, and he's kind of the front of the brand, and he's on LinkedIn and he's on TikTok and he's, creating video content. How do you think executive comms is changing with this new emergence of like the founder-led brand?
Well, I think it puts another layer on there. And I think, CEOs really need to be, in many ways, the face and voice of their brand. And I think it's a lot more work than maybe it was in the past. And I think you've also got the rise of, chief comms officer. And I think PR, we just did a big thing on that. The pay is dramatically up for folks like that. The importance is up for that. These are people that are usually part of the C-suite now. And so I think you've seen that elevation of communications. And I think some CEOs are really good at it, and some aren't. And you have to be disciplined and consistent. I remember working sometimes with clients, and a CEO might try one or two blog posts and then lose interest in it, not keep up with it. And, a lot of it is presentation skills too. And I think so many CEOs are poor presenters. They're just not good at getting out there and doing either a presentation to their team. It could be at a town hall meeting or with the media. They just don't come across really well. And I think I always just say there's some theatrics in that. And I think the CEOs, they got that and did it really well, understood that.
Yeah, and it feels like it can be learned, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg had a really tough time for a while, and then now he's like tan and good looking, and he's doing jujitsu, and he's going on Rogan, and like people like him now.
Yeah, no question. And that used to be a big thing that I used to be active on with presentation training. And I used to always say I can bring someone up 2-letter grades. If somebody's a C, I could get them to an A. But if they're an F, well, let's get them to a C plus, and make it functional. So yes, you can teach people; they can learn, but they got to be pretty dedicated to it. They have to really want to do that. But it is a massive. If you're a CEO in any industry right now, that's a big part of the job. Is your education, storytelling. That's inherently part of the job.
Yeah, that's wild. All right, so I want to go back to the Holdco stuff. So, when did you start to flirt with the idea of selling, and what was it about MDC that you thought that was where you wanted to land the ship, essentially, or join?
Yeah, I would say back in time, I think the scale was if you got to about 10 million in revenue, you were all of a sudden going to be on the radar, and all of a sudden you become an acquisition target. And Andy and I spent about 2 years speaking to different holding companies, and MDC was different. They had a very different approach to it. It was very brand centric versus holding company centric. And what I mean by that is they really didn't they believed that clients hired brands, not necessarily hired holding companies. So MDC was kind of a very light touch. It was run by Miles Nadal, and I think history knows what Miles. He was pretty, very flamboyant and really well-spoken, interesting guy. And but I think, and you and I talked earlier about agencies like 72 Sunny and Anomaly and Crispin Portbogusky, and which was a big part of the MDC back then. And we were really intrigued when we would talk to their agencies that they were like, yeah, you don't really see them that much. It was very light touch. And they felt that they were really able to build their brands and accelerate. And their model was interesting because they would take a 51% stake. So you would still own 40.
Just enough to be the boss, right?
Just enough to be the boss. But honestly, Dylan, it was pretty hands off. As long as you were kind of doing what you said you were doing, and they saw that we were really growing their business. And I will say, Miles had a real skill of being able to catch an agency on the way up. So they got involved with Crispin like when they had 50 people in MDC. And Crispin in 2010 was one of the hottest agencies on the planet. And they acquired Anomaly, which was about the same size as us, and also in 72 Sunny. They caught massive rides on all of us. So Miles was pretty good at identifying like an agency that was, if you look on that bell curve of growth, that was still on the upswing. And it was great to be a part of that. And MDC, helped us really scale and get into Asia and get into Europe, and it was really a strategic partner. So we had no regrets on that.
Yeah, I remember. They were really active in San Diego. They picked up Vitro, they picked up Citizen, the politics agency or the nonprofit agency down here.
Yeah. I knew the Vitro guys, John and Tom. Yeah, know them really well.
That's awesome. All right. And then bring me up to speed with kind of the Mark Penn Stagwell moment. So
Mark, and I start to lose track of dates, Dylan, because it all blurs together. It was
of course
pre-COVID, I do know that. So it was probably 18, 19. Mark came in and he made a significant investment in MDC. And so now Mark kind of had foot in two camps. He had an investment. He became the CEO of MDC, but he was also involved in Stagwell. And they needed to merge these two entities together. And MDC was the publicly traded company, and Stagwell was at the time. They merged the two together. It's now one publicly held entity, and they rebranded as Stagwell. And it's really a collection of old MDC agencies. There were some old Stagwell agencies, and obviously some new agencies they've acquired since.
Yeah, and it feels like they're definitely punching above their weight class with like the whole sport beach thing. Like that feels like the hot ticket, like whether you're going to CES or Cannes, like that's the thing that everybody wants to be at.
Yeah, they've been really creative on that, and it's really resonated with that, and I think it was good. They needed to do something to differentiate, and I think they've done a really nice job about that.
Yeah. All right, let's move into your career as a filmmaker. So when did you start getting interested in being a movie producer and starting
Yeah,
Slam Film?
it's funny. I've always been interested in film. I've written a couple screenplays, I've written a couple novels, and it was always been fascinated since I was a kid with the film industry. Always something I wanted to do, and so I was in London for a couple years in 15, 16, building our Europe operations, and became fascinated with the Premier League and playing soccer. It was a little bit, I was a little old for that, where it was, so I wasn't exposed to it as a kid, but I was blown away by the support and the fans. The fans were next level. It was like Yankees, Red Sox times 100. I always felt like, God, there's an amazing story, I think, to be told about, the fans. And I started following Chelsea in the neighborhood, and went to some games, and was fascinated by the team, their history. And you kind of file that away. And then, years later, my goddaughter was a producer at NBC, was up at Third Rock, and I'd come into New York, and we'd grab dinner and catch up. And she was like, Uncle Scott, we got to do something. We got to team up on a project. And I said, well, I had this idea about, the fans of Chelsea Football Club, and that would be a really interesting story. And she was like, I'm in. She was, I would quit my job and do this. Much to her mom and dad's chagrin, her dad was a fraternity brother and a lifelong friend. He calls me and says, Jesus Christ, my daughter quits this great job to go move to London for some, movie you want to make. And so we did, and she did. And so then I think two naive Americans thinking that they were going to make a film about the Premier League, and frankly, one of the most valuable sports franchises in the world. And everybody said, you'll never get this done. Never. The team won't support you. They might sue you, and you're going to be dead in the water. And that wasn't the case. And the team embraced us. They gave us incredible access. And we brought in a great director, and we got this thing done. We finished filming, June of 25, and finished the film. We had so many amazing people step up, and Halo Productions was one of the most storied post-production houses in the UK. Took us on for a deep discount. Like, everybody kind of rallied behind us, and and the film was made. And now we're in the tricky part of trying to sell it and market it. And it's kind of like in the film industry, this is kind of like the .com crash. This is a really, really tough time in the film industry.
Yeah, especially for
consolidation. Right? Yeah, exactly. So, we'll have to see. We've had screenings in London. It's been really well liked, and we're talking to a lot of different folks, and we'll see. And I hope we can find a good home for it, because I know one of your questions was, what do you want to do from here? Our idea and what we've pitched is to make this a 6-part series. The Fan.
Ah, interesting.
6 different teams, 6 different sports, 6 different countries, with the Bridge, the film on Chelsea, kind of being the pilot episode. But it's funny, because when you're doing something different, people don't always like different, right? And because it's like, when we've talked to some people, they're like, well, where's the players? Where are the starting? It's like, that's kind of secondary. But we have some really emotional stories from lifelong fans and what the teams meant to them in their lives, and a chance to delve in. We had Danny Finkelstein, who's a really well-known journalist in the UK. He's also on the board of directors at Chelsea. He was instrumental in getting us access. And we're talking to him. He says, "Well, yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. How my family got involved is my parents were Holocaust survivors.
Oh, wow.
My mother was at Bergen-Belsen. Oh, and yeah, she kind of roomed with Anne Frank. Interesting. And historians would spend a lot of time talking to her about Anne Frank and the experiences. But my mom and dad, then we moved to the UK, and they said, we're going to start over. and we're not going to be defined by Hitler. And one of the things they started doing is going to Chelsea football games. And for them, it was the way that they would assimilate into society and create it. So we had a bunch of stories like that that are really moving stories. And it was not about the players. And Chelsea's got great players, but we also felt like that story's been done. And who are we to come in and say, well, that was the best team ever. That was the best manager ever. That was the best game. That's been done to death. But we really want to have this point of view of through the fans' eyes.
Yeah, I love that. And, it seems like such a relevant way to do content these days, especially when you look at the success of like Drive to Survive, the F1 show on Netflix, or the show that followed the PGA players, like, or Michael Jordan's documentary. Like sports docu-style content has performed so well, not just as a modality for for storytelling and communications, but really like to build affinity and awareness around a brand. Did you guys produce financing from like more of a traditional, like just raising money from private equity or private equity or individual equity, or did you guys go like the branded content, like get sponsors and brands to participate?
Lauren and I raised the money ourselves.
Wow.
We basically pulled it together ourselves, which was, was not easy, and you wish you had more. You always, playing the hindsight game. The biggest cost for us, Dylan, was licensed footage. The rights to license footage. The Premier League is good to work with, but it's really, really expensive. They know the value of their brand. So having, licensed footage, game footage, things like that was super expensive. So we had some in there. I wish we had a bigger budget for that. You could have added more to it. But again, I think it also would have taken away some of the, once you got heavily into the players, you kind of lost the mission of the film.
So what's the plan for marketing? Are you doing the festival circuit? Are you trying to get,
we've been talking to a lot of the streaming companies. We're talking to, different distribution companies. We are, in the process of, going after some of the film festivals for next spring, kind of pursuing multiple, avenues around that. Streaming, your points about sports documentaries are spot on. And the downside is, and I would argue this really isn't truly a sports documentary. It's a lot more of a human interest story.
Yeah.
About the fans' experience. But a lot of the streaming companies now are really focused on live sports.
Yep.
Look at like Netflix and Amazon and Apple. They're really focused on bringing up live sports productions. So we'll have to see. We've got World Cup this year. I think our content lines up well with that. No doubt we'll find a place for this, but making the movie seems a lot easier than marketing.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. So what do you think will be the determiner of the next 5 installments? Like how will you go about choosing the next sports, the next teams, the next geographies?
We've already got some ideas, Dylan, of things we would like to do the other episodes. Actually, whoever, buys, the final product will have a say in that. We definitely are not in a position to finance that ourselves. So we would definitely look to someone to acquire and help shape that. But we have a pretty good idea of the kind of teams that we want to bring in. We want to create a really different international feel. We talked about doing cricket as one of the episodes, which is just exploding in India. There's a team like the Super Kings, which is the Yankees of Indian cricket. And, I think to be able to bring together just the visual in India, the visual experience, almost like the way we were able to do this in London, would be incredible. We've talked about doing something in New Zealand with the All Blacks rugby team.
That's a good one.
That really defines the country of New Zealand. But then swinging to the U.S. And we've talked about, and it's funny, if you Google world's greatest sports fans, oftentimes what comes up is Duke basketball. And crazies. And So you thought there could be a spot for them. I think you could definitely look at like the Red Sox and the Green Bay Packers. Um, so I think we have a pretty good idea. And it's funny when we screened the film for Chelsea for the team, they were like, there's not a team on this planet that would not want to participate in something like this, to really showcase the heritage, the fans, the relationship with the team. So I think that's the easy part. And I honestly believe it's going to be a really come out. The screenings that we've done for the Bridge have been so well received, really, really emotional. But it's just a hard time right now trying to get in. And look, we are first-time filmmakers. We don't really have a track record. And I was talking to an exec, a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, "Man, I know Academy Award-winning directors that are having trouble getting their films played." So
wow,
odds are stacked against us a little bit, but I think we've proven that yes, we can do this, and we did something that everybody said there is no way that two Americans would get this film done, and we did.
Yeah, that's wild. Have you heard of that? Division II baseball team called the Bananas or something like that?
Yeah.
That would be a good one
Out
too,
on
right?
stilts and things like that. It'd be fun. Yeah, you could do a whole minor league thing too.
So moving forward after this project, are you going to continue to do stories about sports and fandom, or are there other areas that you want to explore?
We'd like to pursue that. Lorna and I have talked, doing documentaries, it's a whole different animal. We've also talked about, God, it'd be interesting to acquire the rights to a book and do something from scratch and really, take a whole different approach to it. More, not a non-documentary, do a different kind of film. So we're looking at a few different things in that area too. We really enjoyed it. I think that we're both committed to doing this, but it comes down to money too.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it's well, I feel like with your relationships and history as a brand guy, I feel like brand storytelling is probably one of the hottest spaces around right now. Companies that want to either support storytelling or tell their personal story. Feels like that would be a natural place for you to explore some.
I think so, and I think there's a rule for that. We had to get through this, and we're still up to our ears in that. We've got kind of a lot going on in the spring, and we'll kind of see how this plays out. But I think we've proven to ourselves that we can do this, and we're good at this. And I think Lauren's a really good producer, coming from her background. I think I understand putting teams together and getting the right people on board, and kind of with a vision of what the story should be. So it's a good partnership. And now we've got film, and so we're no longer saying we haven't done a film. We've done a film. So we'll just have to see how it goes.
Totally. All right. So I want to shift a couple more questions back to your agency experience. So after stepping back from the day-to-day, do you think about success differently now compared to earlier in your career?
Yeah, I think when you're early in your career, you're in the build, there's just no time to reflect. You're just so, up to your ears building. But it's funny because Andy and I, when we sat down in that summer of 2001, talked about the kind of agency we want to have. And we talked about we want a place where there's no politics, where clients and people stay for a really long time. And we talked about why is morale so shitty at agencies? Can we do something different? Can we actually create a place that people want to be at and thrive? And it's funny because 3 years later, for my 40th birthday, Andy gave me the napkin that we had sketched out these ideas. He had kept it for all these years.
Wow.
And I think if you look back even towards the end of my career there, we never lost sight of what those really, it was, number one, we used to say it's about the work. Focus on doing great work. If you do great work, everything else falls in place. And we had a really flat organization, Dylan. I mean, even at the very end, I never had an assistant. I just didn't. People knew an intern in the Atlanta office could call me at home on a Saturday.
Wow.
It was, really kind of an open door. Everybody plays a major role in this thing. And we had people stay for years and years and years. I remember we created a sabbatical program. We said, if you've been with the company for 5 years, you get a sabbatical. And then we're like, who's ever going to stay with us 5 years? But I mean, hundreds of sabbaticals have been taken. We have people that are coming up on their 20th anniversary with the company. And, they really believed in what we were doing and what we were building. And what I always thought was amazing, whether I could go to Beijing or I could be in London or I could be in San Diego. And it always had the same culture vibe. We focused on hiring smart people, but really nice people too. The kind of people that you would want to spend time with. And I think that really caught on. That really resonated. We were agency of the decade from 2010 to 20, and agency of the year, and best places to work, and all those things, which I felt were really just reflective of the original concept of do great work and treat people right. You kind of boil it down to a certain level of simplicity.
I love that. A lot of agency guys, when they sell their agency, they find themselves opening up a new shop. I opened up 15 Minutes with Howard Bragman right after he sold his shop to IPG.
I remember Howard, yeah.
Yeah. He sadly passed away.
Legend, a legend in entertainment, PR for sure.
Yep. And then I just interviewed Michael Nyman at Possible last year. And I don't know if you've been following the news there, but he just bought basically what was left of BNC back from IPG during the merge. Feels like a lot of agency guys, they can't stay out of the game. You've seemed to figure out how to, transition.
Yeah, I think it's true. And
new.
Look, you learn the lesson when you quote, retire. These are long days to fill. Right, Dylan? You go to the gym, you have a great workout, and then it's 9 a.m. And so and I always told my wife, I said, you can't go from 100 miles an hour to 0. You got to kind of gradually, bring the plane down a bit. So I had the film production company. My son and I bought an e-commerce company over the summer.
Oh, let's go.
That's what really floored my wife, honestly, when she said, when does this retirement thing begin? But we're having a blast, and I've had to dive in. I think you always want to keep learning. And I didn't know anything about Google ads, meta ads, digital performance, and, up to my ears in that now. And
what are you guys selling?
It's a company called Alpine Rings, and we sell male wedding bands.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And, we spent 6 months looking through different opportunities and came across this one in Dallas and flew down to Dallas and, met the owner of the company. And he had a lot of things going on. And he was like, this is kind of my orphan business. And we moved the whole thing to Walnut Creek and, hired a couple of guys, and we're off and running. And the business is doing really well. But it's fun after all those years on the agency side. Now I'm on the brand side.
Yeah, now you actually get to execute all the
brand
things
and
you
figuring
learned, right?
that, and we have ad agencies and trying to, and I immediately wanted to kind of change the direction and the story of it. And here's a funny story too, Dylan, is I knew that I could bring in a consultant. They would say, all right, here's what you're going to do. You're going to offshore all the phone calls to the Philippines. And then we're going to have AI take care of all the email. And we're going to really simplify it, and we'll create some efficiency. And I realized that's the last thing I want to do.
Wow.
And so what I told the guys here, I said, we are going to kill it on customer service.
Yeah, you're going the Zappos route.
I wrote a whole blog post about it, and I told people, I said, you call us, we answer the phone. You're going to speak to Sam, Kyle, Eric, or Scott. Period. If
so cool.
Us, we will get back to you within 12 hours and respond to your email. So our reviews have gone like that. And so we're kind of that's not to say we don't use AI, and we do use it as an efficiency tool, but I kind of want to be the anti-AI when it came to customer service. I didn't want to outsource my phone calls. And some of it was, I had a real challenge. I will not use the name. Let's just call it a major payment provider.
Yep.
And we had a hiccup, and we couldn't get some money that was owed to us. Dylan, have you tried to reach a major corporation lately?
I mean, not really.
You can't get a hold of anybody. You can't reach anybody. And it got so bad, what I did is I tracked down the name of their general counsel, and I FedExed a letter to them and basically said, we're a small family, but you are doing material harm to our business. And I finally got a phone call. But that taught me too. I said, that's not how I want to run my business. if somebody has a problem, I want them to get a hold of us.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. So many people look at customer service as an expense, where I think you're looking at
it as
it.
a pain in the ass, and I think they look at it as like, I know a solution. We'll make it so no one can reach us.
Yeah, but what you're doing is you're turning it into a marketing channel by giving people a great experience, and then they're going to go tell their friends about that great experience or the reviews as well.
You mentioned Zappos, which I agree. I remember the rise of Zappos, but I remember when I was younger and when we started doing work with Nordstrom back in the 90s.
Yeah, Nordstrom is the godfather of customer service.
Family business, and the way they treated people and the way they treated their employees, and it's like, I think that everything's old is new again. You know what I mean? It's like, I think you will start to see a backlash a bit over people realizing that they are caught up in AI hell and they can't reach anybody, and the auto replies that they're getting, And so, yeah, I know we kind of distraction from that, but it's fun. And I think that you got to keep yourself engaged and doing different things. And for me, that was the outlet. Keep trying different things.
I love it. Well,
would I go into the agency business? No, I would not start. When I launched the company, Dylan, I was 37 years old. And
yeah,
I've had people approach me and say, hey, would you want to do it again? And I'm like, I'm 62 now. It's kind of a different energy. What it took to really build that business. You've been in the agency business. It's a grind, and I would not want to go back to 60, 70-hour weeks. And I'm advising a few other firms, and I'm excited. I think what reminds me there is some similarities now is during the .com and all the chaos. I always say, out of chaos comes opportunity.
Yep.
And we launched our business at one of the worst times in agency history. There's going to be some good businesses that get launched, starting last year into this year. And I think when you're independent, you have an advantage because you can really play the long game. You can invest in the future. You can really look to hire people, and you can kind of build your business. It's a whole different mold when you're on the holding company side. And look, and I get it. You can't say you don't understand the whole game, but if you're part of a holding company, any publicly traded company, you've got to go to Wall Street and you've got to say, these are the numbers we're going to deliver. But agencies are fickle businesses. It's very hard to predict revenue. It's kind of a month to month, quarter by quarter, and it's really focused on what did you do that quarter. It's hard to play the long game when you're in that. It's hard to then really invest for the future. So I understand where it is, and I think there's going to be some new agencies that spring out of it that really want to kind of take control of their own destiny.
Yeah, well, in honor of Warren Buffett and his retirement, what was his quote? When people are greedy, be afraid, and when people are afraid, be greedy, right?
Absolutely right. And I think this is where there's going to be great opportunities. There's going to be, I think, a lot of M&A activity, and I think you're going to see some real shakeouts. But I'm really interested to see. I think there's going to be who's the next Allison+Partners. That'll be fun to see. Who can take something from scratch and turn it into a $100 million firm. Not easy to do, but I'm kind of excited to see that.
Yeah, same. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with our audience and spending Friday of New Year's week with us. Where would you like to point the audience to learn anything about what you're up to these days?
Well, you certainly can sign on to our website, the Bridge Film, and you can see where that's going to be headed. And we'll keep posting and updating people on that. I usually put a lot on my LinkedIn page. And if you are getting married and you need a wedding band, you know where to go. Alpine Rings.
Let's go. Well, I'll link to both those in the show notes. And for all of you who are following along at home, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a subscribe or a follow. If you're listening to the podcast, give us a honest review on whatever platform you happen to be listening on. That's how we find a larger audience organically. And last but not least, if there's somebody out there in agency land, or maybe an entrepreneur who's thinking about trying to buy a new business and get into something else with their kids or their family, or just somebody who you think would benefit from the conversation I had with Scott today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, Scott, I will thank you and wish you a happy New Year.
Dylan.